Property investing has always been a finance game. It's all about the numbers. It's always been about the numbers, but as of the past 5 to 10 years, it's gotten very much increasingly important from a finance standpoint. How do we lend the money to be able to get a big enough portfolio to be able to build our passive income? And that's exactly what this session is about. As you guys all know, we're building $150,000 passive income in public. We're buying the portfolio. So far, we have about $2 million odd worth of property. That's already gained $200,000 in the last, 4 or 5 months. Incredible. But how are we going to do it? How, as property investors, do we continue our property investing journey? So tonight we're bringing on Whybrow of Strategic Mortgage Brokers, and he's going to talk us through it. He's going to create not just our situation, but a fictitious situation for two normal everyday Aussies that both work full time. How can they continue their borrowing ability? And also understanding trust. Everyone's like, unlimited borrowing capacity with trust. How does this stuff work? I want to understand it. We want to deep dive into that, and that's exactly what this session is all about. Hey everyone, my name is Joe Tucker, and together with Jeff Miles, we created Oz Property Investors, Australia's largest property investment community. Each week, we interview top property experts so you guys can learn and grow and become better at property investors and be a fly on the wall in these conversations. This one's a really good one. I think you're going to enjoy it. Let's jump in and let's make $150,000 of passive income. Let's roll.
Promised about structuring and the steps to take to build that 150K passive income portfolio. And we have, so Aaron, you're actually the broker for this portfolio. I mean, you've prepared yourself for some fancy stick figures. So we're going to go through a bit of an over the shoulder, look at how we do it. But what is the first step, I suppose, you should take when you're embarking upon this journey?
So with building a investment property portfolio, you need to understand where you can get money from the bank and how to achieve it. So what's most commonly known is everyone knows that you can buy your own place or buy an investment property and you can whack your name on it. So buy it in your individual name. And that's where we were just talking about getting some tax benefits. That's where you might get that stuff. And obviously if it's right, wrong, or indifferent, there's no wrong or right with property investment. You just got to have a goal. But personal name is the most common where we can put assets. The other one is lenders will lend to entities, trusts, companies, wherever it is. And then lenders will also lend to self-managed super funds. So those are the three most common areas that you can lend money to. So if you understand that before the outset, you now know how to play the game at a much higher level. So if you, when we have a look at some of my stick figures, if you have $700 to $1.5 million worth of borrowing capacity, I know that over time and with the right plan that you can get borrowings of $3, $4, $5 million if you can continually maintain that $700 to $1.5 million borrowing capacity over time. So I've just prepared our two people here. We got Bill and Robin. I was trying to think of names, but Bill and Robin. 180K income, 120K income. So what we've got here, we've got a couple and all the normal mod cons of what happens with a family here. They're a little bit more controlled because it's a scenario and we can't go into all the variables right now. And I've done it in a way, I've done 3 scenarios to give them 3 options that they can change their outcome on borrowing capacity. And I've also shown you what we can do when it's in a trust. I'll touch on how super works at the end. But here we go. We got Bill plus Robin. We got 180K, 120K. Nice. We have some living expenses. They try to control their living expenses, but the banks really determines that they need to spend $5,900 there. That's on average. Some banks want more, some banks want less. They want to give themselves some benefit with their incomes and have the private health insurance and save some money there. But we know lenders like to put that outside the standard household expenditure measure. Some may not. Some have a big bucket. Some want to segregate it out, but they don't have any other debt. So that's all cool there. They got a current house, 1.2 million with 900K on it, and they got some cash to help with deposits. So there are a lot of variables that people might ask, are we going to go equity? Are we going to go cash and all that sort of stuff? But what I want to do is the 3 scenarios on how you change your borrowing capacity. So let's have a look. Scenario 1 is, let's put Bill and Robin in their current home that they own as an owner occupied. And then we'll go buy an investment property and we'll get our increased rent of $1,000 a week. So we're buying about $1.2 million. So they've got taste of 1.2 million current house. They want to go up to there again. So how does it work? How does this one come out in there? So what I did is I went to the middle of the range of lenders. And in the middle range of lenders, I've been able to extract out that we are able to get in a trust. We would be able to borrow 770,000 top number. Now, there are lenders that will lend more, and there's lenders that will lend less. I've just gone into the middle, nice product, offset account in a trust, offset account in personal land, just to give a good experience, and then add some time and add some strategy in there for the next one. Personal land, we can increase that to 1.18 million for this scenario. But Bill and Robin wanted to know a little bit more about how they can do some more stuff. So we can take the same scenario and we can put scenario 2. Let's say we're not going to live in the house. We're going to rent that house out. We're also going to incur a rental expense while we do that as well. So we're going to get rent for the current house. We're going to get rent for the new house, and we're going to have to pay some rent. So how does this change our borrowing capacity? So in a trust, we jump up 100 grand by just doing that change, which is pretty cool. And in a trust, we jump up again on that area.
So what do you mean jump up?
So if we go back, so if we live in the house, we're at 770 and 1.18.
Yep.
And if we rent it out, I've got a typo error there. It's 870. So we go up 100 grand in trust, and we go up 100 grand in personal land. Looks like I've taken the wrong picture. So
purely because of rent vesting.
Purely because of rent vesting. Yep.
Rent vesting can be very powerful, can't it? I mean, it's just sort of weighing up whether you want to live with your parents or a family member, or who it is you want to live with.
Yeah.
Well, no, you don't have to live with a family member. You can just you can live with whoever you can just live by yourself. You're just rent vesting. You live whatever the heck you want.
It's got to be rent paid. Depends on how much rent you're paying, but yeah.
So here's the interesting thing: a $650,000 mortgage is $1,000 a week in repayments, and you could pay rent of $1,000 a week quite easily in most areas, if we agree. And if we look at how the bank's calculators work with that, the rent they will put in the calculator at $1,000 a week, no buffering, no nothing. But with the mortgage at $650,000 with $1,000 a week in repayments, they're going to put in the calculator at $1,250. So the bank's buffered the lending so that if the rates go up, which is the main thing, is the banks are worried if the rates go up. Now, we all know they talk about the rates coming down, but they always are judging as if the rates are going up. Mm-hmm. So so we've got, they can live in it, they can rent. So we go from low borrowing power, extra borrowing power, and this is the last one. But if these were my kids, I'd probably kick them out of home. They could go on board. If they could go on board for $650 a month, that goes on to the calculator. They get their new investment property. They've got the current house renting out. So they got all this rental income coming in, and this is where they can accelerate their borrowing capacity by another couple of $100 grand.
What is board?
When they go board is
like
when you go live at home with mum and dad.
Yeah. Oh. Didn't you pay board, Joe, mate? I was paying a couple $100. So it's like, oh, if you're gonna stay, if you're earning a wage and you pay money, it's like you're boarding with somebody. It's like boarding house. But,
no, I didn't do that.
So a lot of this is mainly around the younger investors. So it's I always encourage any young person to buy a property as young as they can, and then they can go off and do whatever they want. And if they're able to do so when they're living with mum and dad, they're only getting an expense on the table of $650 versus $650 a week in rent. So if they can get their first couple of properties in before they need to fly the nest, so to speak, it can help massively increase their borrowing capacity. Then renting can, but also if we do have the magical ball and the rent and the interest rates come down, we may see a flip that owning a property might be a little bit cheaper than renting a property. You never know what might happen in that space. So that's where I got 3 scenarios on how we can get these guys with standard numbers. Obviously, everyone's got a little bit of prickly bits or good bits or big deposits or big equities, or current homes are a bit different, or they've got opportunities to upgrade, construct, put put additions onto the properties, but just 3 simple little changes can change the whole thing in your borrowing capacity picture to be able to go to the next property. And then this is us talking about next purchase, but past that next purchase, if you have a goal and a plan to put it all in your personal name, that's great. And if you've got a goal and a purpose to go into a trust, that's where we can get next level lending, where we can exclude debt. And then the scenario I spoke about just before we were going to go through our stick figure, guys, with Bill and Robin, is self-managed super funds is another way that we can extend our borrowing capacity past what we would normally have in our own name, because of how the banks isolate super is for super and for retirement, and personals for personal for right now. And if you think of it that way, the bank's policies are super doesn't affect personal, personal doesn't affect super when you're looking at borrowing capacity calculators. So that's where, if we've got $700 to $1.5 million worth of personal borrowing capacity, but our super could have $1 million worth of borrowing capacity sitting there and we didn't know about it.
Well, not the question I have. The question I hear a lot is, cool, I've got $1 million in borrowing capacity in my personal name. I've got $1 million of borrowing capacity in my SMSF. What should I be buying under? What should I be doing? Not financial advice.
I love this one. It's like the biggest, this comes back to my biggest problem that probably investors have is, what's your goal? Like, are we talking about a person that's, say, 50 years old, wants to get up to $3 or $4 million worth of property before retirement, knows that if they get a certain amount of property in their own name, that works really well. They know they can have some property in super, and they know that they can start accessing that at age 67. So they may not need if you're in that age bracket, you may be able to build up some property in your own name, but you might be able to build up faster in super because you've had longer in the workforce, you've got more deposit power and all that sort of stuff. So that would allow you, if you've got lots in your super and lots of property in your super, and you've got some in your own name, you may not need 150 grand now, because you know that when you hit age 67, when you can access super, that's where the kick is going to come in. And that's where you might get your 150 grand of passive income, because between ages 50 and 67, you may still want to do a little bit of work and other things like that. So we have a lot of people that come to us and they'll do simultaneous purchases. They might do a couple in their super and a couple in their own name. So which ways to do it first, which ways to do it best? There isn't a wrong or a right way here. Some people will cap out their personal land, which I would say don't do that, and then go to super, because it can distract you for 6 to 12 months and wait for rents to rise, pay rises, debt to go down, all that sort of stuff. Or you could do it simultaneously, depending on how fast you want to build this thing.
Would you say don't tap out? Don't. What do you mean? You just said
don't go right to the maximum borrow.
Yeah, it's a bit like
okay, cool. So I can borrow $1 million. I've just bought a $500,000 property. I can now buy another $500,000 potentially.
Yep.
That's maxing out my borrowing, right? Like,
yep.
Why am I not doing that?
So it's a bit like borrowing capacity is a bit like insurance. So if you want to have insurance to protect you from, say, cancer or anything like that, when you've got cancer, it's probably not the best way to go and approach an insurance company, because they're not going to protect you. So when you're looking at borrowing capacity, if you've got $1 million worth of borrowing capacity and you need to go to the 150K passive income and you need $3.5 million worth of borrowing, how do you do that? So you might have something in your own name to tick the box for a tax deduction, whatever the thing is there. So then you've got $500,000 or wherever you've got left. Well, this is where we need to go, okay, do we do some in super if you've got enough? Let's say we're a bit younger, we don't have much in super. How do we then go to the next step? This is where we want to structure the next area, where we're looking at corporate entities, corporate trusts, and then leaning on the banks for policies, and hopefully they don't change, but they haven't at the moment, where we can, as you've got the property into a trust, if you've gone hard and you've gone 90% landing in a trust, well, you're going to have a little bit more time to wait than a person that maybe has gone 80 or 70. Because when you go for another property and we want to include or exclude that trust, it has to be profitable. It has to be in an entity. It has to be profitable. So your personal borrowing capacity, and when we're looking at trust, is yourself, your living expenses, your debt, your current properties, whatever you've got there, plus the debt, plus the rental income that you're going to go and get in your trust. So you need to have borrowing capacity left before you start talking about structures and getting the right advice on that from a borrowing capacity point of view. Whether it's wrong or right to go in a trust, that is totally up to you. There is no wrong and right. It's just, how does the numbers work?
Aaron, why are borrowing capacities different for trusts or personal?
Yeah, that's a cool question. So there's a couple of lenders that aren't so different, but they just have a different policy and a different appetite. But in the main, in your personal name, you're able to claim the interest, and claiming the interest may result in a tax return. So the lender allows you to add back the interest according to the relevant tax policy. So when we put in the borrowing capacity, we put in your gross income, not your net income. So when we put in the rental income, they shade the rental income. Then they go, oh, we're going to charge 6.5% for the investment loan. So they're going to add back the interest attributed to your tax rate in the calculator. When you do it in a trust is a different entity to yourself. So the bank goes, well, any losses made in the trust can't be claimed on the tax on your own name. So they don't allow the interest to be added back. There are some exceptions, and there are a couple of lenders that do it. We usually look at which banks do we use first, which banks do we use last, so that we can manage that borrowing capacity for the long term, depending on how quick or how slow you want to build your property portfolio with lending. So it's all about that interest add back that is attributed in the personal name versus in an entity, because the losses stay in the entity. And the reason you play entities is you're playing the long game. You're not worried about the tax too much, which obviously gets to the point where do investors go wrong? Well, they've got to spend money to make money. And sometimes having some losses in a trust is potentially not a bad thing, as long as they can get it to profitability quickly. The 5 things to increase your borrowing capacity for 2025, I have to say, you can earn more money. Earn more money.
Charlie Taylor approach, eh? Earn more money.
Got to increase your money.
Better. Just be better.
Yeah, with employees, do whatever you can. A 5 or 20 grand increase can do the world. For businesses, cut expenses that can increase profit, or know what, if you earn 1,000, how much do you have to pay that ends up on the bottom line? So if you get 1,000, maybe it's $200 or $400 that comes on the bottom line.
The funny thing is, I actually went for a job interview years and years and years ago, and they said, I was like, I need a bigger salary. It was like a sales role, a sales commission. And I'm like, I need a bigger salary because I'm buying property. So that is, you need, like, I need a higher salary. I'm happy to take a cut on the commission. So like, just tell them why. Obviously tell them why you're a great asset to the team, but like, I'm going out to borrow property. That is my goal. I'm going to go out there and find. And if you're a great staff member, they won't want to lose you. So if your goal is to go out there and buy property investment, they will be interested and be like, oh, okay, cool. Well, he has increased value, or she has increased value. And I don't know, flag it with it. You don't ask, you don't get, but sitting there twiddling your thumbs isn't going to do anything.
There you go. So the next one, pay off debt, manage your living expenses in your own name. So that can really help people that are coming up to the end of non-government schools, have their last payments of that for year 12 or wherever. That can really increase their borrowing capacity once they've paid that off, or they can pay it off earlier and get their borrowing capacity today. Number 3, purchase assets that help your circumstances.
Okay.
All right. Do you need the rent? You don't need the rent. Do you need tax deduction? Do you need the rent? What is it that you're trying to do with the properties? Like the example is Sydney's rental yield might be not what you need, and you might need something in, say, Queensland or South Australia where the rental yield is a lot higher. As an example, not advising. Purchase the right assets to match your goals. Number 4 is you can actually understand some banking policies and risk factors. So Joe, you mentioned before, if you were looking at a property, like if you're looking at a property, you probably are aware with some of the lending that you've got that you know what some of the bank's policies and risk factors are, that you could potentially see if it's worth calling the broker up, worth calling the solicitor up, because you're going after what the quality of the property is. So you've people having some understanding of bank policies and risk factors. Most of the people that have that understanding don't really want to get involved in the banking process anyway, and want the broker to do it for them. But it's always good when you're looking at the opportunity in front of you. how things change for the employee. You mentioned, Jeff, before about changing jobs, second jobs, maternity leave, all that stuff, knowing how they treat that and what timing you should go back to the market to buy the next property versus just having a life. The business owner, sometimes the business owner going into the next 6 months of the year, what can you do to maximize your profit and loss? What's the low-hanging fruit, as we've heard other people on the podcast talk about? What's the low-hanging fruit that you can do to increase that profitability in your business? And number 5 is ownership structures. Where can you gain the investment loan? Understanding how that one plays can really help you navigate not only is this good, is this bad, or where you want to go, whether it's self-managed super funds, corporate entities, the type of properties you're trying to do, and then collaborate with your investment team, with accounting, tax, and all those people. Those are my things. And really the final thought on my top 5 is that what is in between your ears is going to tell you how far you can go with your investment journey.
Wow.
That's your brain.
Question that I'm really surprised that nobody's actually mentioned this throughout the podcast. This is one of my questions, but I want to know how many investors that are building those portfolios that you sort of see in the ads, the 6 in 8 months, or the 15 in 12 months, or 15 in 18 months, whatever it is. Are those people? Yes, they probably have good incomes, but are there some people out there that want to go quicker, considering selling those properties, taking that cash, and then redeploying it using structures? Is that kind of something you see investors using?
Don't be afraid of selling. Like, you know the best way to get your borrowing capacity back?
Reduce the debt.
Repay debt.
Yeah.
And sometimes the quickest way to repay the debt is sell. But you've got to understand what your next goal is. If you're selling just because you're selling because you want your borrowing capacity back, but you don't have a goal of what you're going to do next, that's a problem. If you know that you want to build your borrowing capacity back up to $1 million and maybe structure it out a little bit more, you know what the goal is, and you can do some calculations prior to doing it. So prior to selling and incurring all the costs, you could do borrowing capacities prior to doing any trust lending. You can do borrowing capacities prior to doing self-managed super funds. So you can validate the cost. So that's a really key thing to do in consultation with your investment team. So so selling properties to gain ground is a brilliant strategy. Probably not for everyone. And from a number, I can only talk from a numbers point of view. You reduce the debt, I can increase your borrowing. But is it right to sell or wrong to sell? That's a conversation you're going to have with yourself, your property partner, and how things are going to look. I was talking to a broker in the office today, and I said, well, I had to sell some shares at $40 a share, but 6 months later it was $100 a share. So you got to be careful sometimes. Like, I don't have a crystal ball. I had a need to do it at the time, and it did the purpose, and it did it, and I got into the next property, so I was happy. But I couldn't predict what was going to happen. So I can only talk about it from a numbers point of view. Anyone considering selling needs to get the right advice, or the need. They need to think about themselves.